Text extra and your message to 51551 or from the north to 80889. Sunday Spirit on RTE Radio 1 Extra.
Well, next this morning, news that at 1 o'clock today on O'Connell Street, there will be a protest march called Not in Our Name. It's to demonstrate that hatred and violence can never be legitimised in the name of Islam. We cross over to Blanchardstown this morning, where we're joined by Shaykh Dr. Umar Al-Qadri, who is the person behind this particular march, and we're going to find out a little bit more. Shaykh, good morning and welcome to the programme.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me.
The reason for this particular march is, I suppose, obvious to a lot of people, but it's been some time coming.
Throughout the past decade, Muslim scholars throughout the world have condemned terrorism. In fact, the Al-Azhar Institute and the university, the most prestigious university of the Islamic world, has issued a fatwa against terrorism. An influential Muslim scholar, Shaykh Umar Al-Qadri, who happens to be my teacher, has also in the year 2008 issued a fatwa against terrorism. Many scholars have condemned terrorism and the atrocities committed in the name of Islam. However, it is very unfortunate that very few of them really got the attention from the media, and most attention is given to the negative and the sensational news.
It's interesting because even as you said that word fatwa, for a person who hasn't an insight into it would immediately presume that that's a death penalty on the people who have made these particular judgments or statements. It's not.
No, absolutely not. Fatwa means an Islamic ruling, a verdict on a particular issue. So the fatwa against terrorism is, for example, a scholar who is qualified and who is very well versed in the Quran and in the Hadith, in the teachings of Islam. He gives his ruling, understanding on a particular issue. And when scholars like the Al-Azhar University ulama scholars issue fatwas, then these are very, very influential fatwas, and they are accepted throughout the Muslim world.
All right. What I'd like to do in this conversation is to clear up a lot of the misunderstanding that a lot of people have, not necessarily on purpose, but just through general information. The first question is an obvious one. Is Islam a faith of peace?
Well, Islam is, from its literal meaning, Islam comes from the root word salama, which means peace. One of the greetings when a Muslim meets another person, according to the prophetic tradition, is Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, which is to highlight that from a Muslim, one should only be able to get peace. And the Prophet Muhammad once was asked, how do you define a Muslim? And he replied by saying, Al-Muslimu man salim al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi, that a Muslim is the one from whose hands and tongue other people are safe. So a Muslim is supposed to be, according to the prophetic teachings, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, a source of peace for others. However, there are always people that will be extremist. They will misinterpret religion, whether these are Christians, Muslims, or other people of other faith. And these people will always try to misquote and misunderstand religion and blame religion for extremism and terrorism. While the fact is, no religion, whether this is Islam or any other religion, no religion teaches terrorism and teaches or promotes extremism.
And yet the images that we see on our news programs and with people carrying out acts and using their faith as the justification for this, how does that feel for you as a Muslim?
Well, as a Muslim, it is disheartening, it is very shocking, and it's very painful because as someone who believes in Islam, who has studied Islam, and who has studied the life of the Prophet Muhammad, and who knows that these atrocities can never be legitimized, justified in the name of Islam. It's very hurtful when I see people in the name of Islam committing these acts. Such people should be condemned, and people of faith, Muslims particular, they should condemn all these militants and extremists, because this is part of their religious responsibility. The Quran, for example, highlights and mentions and condemns and disapproves every evil act. Some Muslims question, why do you as a Muslim have to condemn what ISIS do? We have nothing to do with them. And they give an example that, do you see Christians always condemning acts that are committed in the name of Christianity? But the reply to that is that the Quranic methodology, the methodology of the Quran, is to disapprove and highlight that what is evil. So as a Muslim who follows the Quranic methodology, it is important that one does disapprove and one does condemn and highlight that what is committed in the name of Islam, and that is evil and has nothing to do with Islam.
It's interesting, if you look in the Irish context, Irish people have condemned their church. They have, in many cases, walked away from the church. And in that position now, in a secular position, they're making the same judgment call against Muslims in this country.
Well, I believe that Islam itself, the teachings of Islam, they are testimony to the fact that 1300 years we find pluralism, we find wherever Muslims were living, whether this is Granada, Cordova, or whether this is Morocco, we find Muslims were living with other communities in peace. And there was, in fact, the Muslim civilization is the one that has enlightened the West many centuries ago. Now, what has happened in the last 150 years is very significant. We have seen an emerge of a radical version of Islam, radical interpretation of Islam. And these people are absolutely a minority, but they are very influential. They have a lot of funding because certain oil states are backing them up also, and through their funding they are sponsoring that particular ideology and spreading it throughout the world. They are in a minority, but it's a very dangerous kind of interpretation and version of Islam that needs to be condemned and is being condemned throughout the Muslim world by the majority of the Muslims. Well, Islam 1400 years ago, the Prophet Muhammad in the Arabian Peninsula, he promoted and he propagated the belief in God, the belief that all humans are equal, and the belief that one is not only held liable and accountable on the Day of Judgment for how he worshipped God, but also how he treated his fellow human beings. That is the Islam of the Prophet Muhammad, and throughout the many centuries, the Muslims had been following and had been adhering to this Islam. The Islam of the Prophet Muhammad is an Islam that promotes peace, it promotes tolerance, acceptance, it promotes knowledge. And this is why we find that in the early centuries of Islam, there were Muslim scientists, Muslim civilization that enlightened the world for mathematics, for example, or other sciences, algebra. When we look at them, then the founders of these were all Muslims. So the Islamic civilization has a very rich history.
Have you looked and thought as to what drives the fundamentalists in this particular case to put women back centuries from where they've come to, or have changed the basic teachings of the Prophet?
Firstly, it is ignorance to the faith, ignorance to the actual scriptures, the teachings of Islam that are mentioned in the Quran and in the Hadith. Secondly, it is those that have a little bit knowledge, they interpret text, for example, out of context, and they do not take into consideration the background of a particular verse, the history of the historical background of its revelation, and they would interpret the Quran just from their own view without taking into consideration the context, and that is very dangerous. The Prophet of Islam said, "Man fassara al-Qur'ana bi ra'yatihi faqad kafara." Whoever interprets the Quran and understands the teachings of Islam literally without taking into context, without taking into consideration the background, the context of a particular text, that person has committed an act of disbelief. And the Quran is very clear that yudillu bihi kasiran wa yahdi bihi kasira, that people from the same Quran, from the same verses of the Quran, some people will gain guidance, while some people at the same time will gain misguidance. And the Quran says, if you want to gain guidance from it, you need to take into consideration the context of the revelation and the life of the Prophet of Islam. Now, the other point is that people have grievances. And they're angry when they look at the policies, the Western foreign policy, for example, the injustices in the Muslim world, the invasion of Muslim countries. And they are angry and they respond to that with extremism, with violence, while in the name of Islam it can never be justified. Islam teaches us that if something happens, if injustice is done to us, we must protest peacefully. We must peacefully try to change the situation. And this is exactly what the Prophet of Islam had done 1400 years ago. He was religiously prosecuted. He was sent, he had to leave the city of Mecca and migrate to another city called Medina. And there he started living. He integrated very well with the local community. And this is how he democratically came into power. And similarly, Muslims should also, if they want to respond and if they are angry, they should use all the peaceful means that are out there to try to respond. And there is no justification at all to respond with violence and extremism because of these grievances. And if a Muslim wants to respond, he must take into consideration how would the Prophet Muhammad respond in that particular situation. And unfortunately, a lot of Muslims do not respond like that. When we see, for example, the caricatures, certain newspapers made these caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad, a lot of Muslims responded not realizing their response was in contradiction to the response of the Prophet Muhammad. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he was mocked 1400 years ago, he would respond with dialogue. He would respond with sometimes ignoring those that mock him. While at the same time, many Muslims, a few years ago, they did not choose to follow the prophetic response. They chose to follow their own response, which was a response of violence. They started protesting and started giving attention to these caricatures why there was no need. These caricatures do not do any harm to our religion, while the extremists, the militants, they who kill in the name of Islam are damaging our faith far more than the caricatures.
What are the consequences in that faith for people who then act not in your name?
Those people that act against the teachings of Islam, and particularly they commit acts of violence, acts of extremism, and they kill innocently people. The Prophet of Islam has 1400 years ago stated that those people that will kill and create chaos in the world in the name of religion, they will have nothing to do with my religion. They're not part of the Muslim faith. In fact, they have nothing to do with Islam. They may call themselves Muslims, but according to the Prophet of Islam, he has said that any person who kills, any person who responds with extremism, violence, and kills people, innocent people, that person has nothing to do with my religion.
I'm talking this morning with Shaykh Dr. Umar Al-Qadri. We're talking about his role in the Irish Muslim Peace and Integration Council and the march coming up later today at 1 o'clock. One of the things you mentioned in our conversation so far is that the need for dialogue, that a Muslim would, instead of being angry, would engage in debate. For him or her to engage in debate, they have to engage with people who are informed. How would Christians, or how should Christians inform themselves about Islam?
Well, first of all, I think that we are living in a very diverse society. Ireland is a very different Ireland than the Ireland that I came in about 10 years ago. We have a lot of new communities, and the Muslim community has increased rapidly. I think the responsibility is on all communities to try to learn from each other, try to sit down with each other. And in order for that to happen, every community needs to be very open, needs to be welcoming. The Irish Muslim Peace and Integration Council in Ramadan, for example, we invited and urged all Muslim communities, organizations, mosques in Ireland to welcome people of other faiths and no faiths to the mosques and give them an opportunity to share the meal together, but at the same time to kind of understand what Islam is all about and give them an opportunity to ask questions about Islam. We had two very successful events, one in Dublin, where a Jewish Holocaust survivor, Tommy Reichenthal, was invited, which was very unique, and it was his 80th birthday also on the same day. It was very unique because for Tommy, he had never been in a mosque. It was his 80th birthday, and he had never been in a mosque. At the same time, there were Muslims who had come all the way from Belfast, who had never seen or had never met a Holocaust survivor. In Ireland, so far Muslim communities do engage with Irish communities, with the people of other faiths and no faiths. They are very welcoming, but I think there is a lot more to be done.
The march is happening later on today at 1 o'clock, gathering at O'Connell Street?
Yes, gathering at O'Connell Street in front of the Dublin Spire. At the same time, we will have 1 minute silence for all the victims, particularly the 3 Irish victims that were killed in Tunisia. We'll hold a 1 minute silence to show respect for them.
Shaykh Dr. Umar Al-Qadri, thank you for joining us from Blanchardstown this morning.
Thank you very much.